So I'm happy that we had a bit of our heads kind of thinking about family members because as we all know, working in long-term care, our stakeholders are both the resident themselves and the families, and their needs aren't always the same, and they're not always symmetrical. Sometimes we're being pulled in different directions. So I'm going to be, can you hear me, by the way? I'm going to be speaking about some of the work that I've done on residents' perceptions and experiences relocating into long-term care. This is part of a larger study. I did look at family members as well, but I'm going to be kind of focusing us in for the talk anyway on the residents. If you have questions about the family members, maybe we can deal with that in the question and answer period. Oh, good. Okay, so we've already talked about caregiving as a career. Relocation is really a process as well, as you know. I mean, you're at the back end of a long process of different stages that people end up going through, and often have to pick up the pieces for things that didn't go well at other stages. So the literature sort of suggests that relocation is really a multi-phase process. There's kind of that decision-making component where one is not just from the fleeting thought that we spoke about to really is this time kind of experience. That is a very long process and has been described as a really, really difficult process by both families and residents. And there's really different research. Some say that when a resident self-initiates the decision, the whole process is better. Others say that many want to defer the decision, that it's too painful to even think about it. It's like giving up. So deferring a decision to somebody else is kind of the better. So, you know, there's still some equivocal findings there. Moving and the actual kind of from the moment in time where you get that sort of bed offer to the move itself is another phase in the process. And it's found to be a rather significant phase for family members. There's almost no research on what is helpful for residents in that moving stage, which is a really important phase for you in long-term care. And finally, that initial adjustment. You know, of course, it's normal to have the sadness and the loneliness. And people suggest different things help with that adjustment period, you know, respect for privacy, kind of accommodating preferences, this kind of thing. Most of the research kind of looks at just one phase, like the decision-making and what that's like, or just the initial adjustment. Very limited kind of looking at the impact of the one on the other. And so there is a bit, and of course it's equivocal, to suggest that yes, a sort of participation in the decision by the resident will be associated with better adjustment. Others suggest that if not participation, at least anticipation. You know too well when you're in long-term care that you get people at the door who thought they were going somewhere else or weren't really anticipating, and how difficult those admissions are for you. You know, what happens at the front end obviously matters sort of at the back end. So I really wanted to look at the different stages and how they each complicate or help the other stage. And what can we do to sort of be supportive at these different stages? So what helps each stage, and how does the presence and absence of condition in one stage help the other stage? And I'm really, you know, I recognize, as I'm sure you do as well, relocation isn't just a long-term nursing home care problem. It's a continuum of care problem. And we really have to get better at helping one another support these stages so that we can all participate in sort of better adjustment. So that's really the aim of what I was looking at. So I recruited from 3 different nursing homes. This was actually an Ontario-based study. So this is findings from 10 residents. It's a qualitative study, so I spent about an hour and a half to 2 hours with each of the resident, really getting an in-depth understanding of their experiences. I wanted people who have relocated within about 4 weeks. So it was really not so much looking like real initial adjustment, but it was a retrospective. So what was the decision like? What was the moving experience like? I wanted to be able for them to be able to report on those stages. And I also kind of analyzed the data as I was doing the interviews. And the great benefit of that is you get a light bulb and you didn't ask that first person, you get to ask the second person. So it was very iterative, I'd say, pretty rich data in that way. So this is probably a fair split. I had 2 men and 8 women. We're about 80% women in long-term care. This is really community placements. When you look at the sample, 7 came from home, 3 from retirement home. Hospital placements, as I'm sure you know on the practice end, are different. And in my family members, I really found that. So think of these as the people really coming from the community and not from hospital as relocations go. Conditions, 7 had physical conditions, largely with mild sort of dementia, and 3 had were there because of their dementia, sort of more moderate level dementia, but still needing to be able to participate in an interview. And the one thing to keep in mind here, which is not representative of everyone in long-term care, everybody in this study had some family member who's supporting them. And I know we're seeing more and more older adults going through these relocations without a critical family member involved. So just important to recognize. So basically, the main finding here was that, of course, for everybody, it's even the best relocations are emotionally complex and effortful. You would hear people say, you do what you have to do. It was hard, but, it's up to me to do something about it. Like, this didn't just kind of happen. It's going to be emotional, even for people who are describing the experience positively. But there seem to be multiple layers impacting each stage. And, for those of you who have a social work background, and we always talk about ecosystems, this is really kind of an ecosystem model. There were sort of systemic organizational conditions, positive and negative, interpersonal interactions between family members and residents themselves and their own values and conditions that kind of created better or worse conditions at each stage. So I'm going to go through them. The reason that I've organized this way, and you'll see at the end, there's kind of a chart, and I've got some handouts for anybody who finds it interesting. It's like, so where do we begin in terms of addressing kind of different conditions at different phases? Because it isn't just a one fix solution. So for sure, in my study, at the pre-move, there were 2 types of pre-move decisions. There was self-initiated, I made the decision to come on my own, and there was other-initiated. They decided, and I went along with it. Some research has kind of found an in the middle stage, I kind of was a part of the decision, but didn't initiate it myself. In this study, it was really one or the other. And the self-initiated decisions were absolutely described more positively and seemed to have more of a positive kind of impact on adjustment. There were conditions at the 3 layers that either kind of supported someone getting a self-initiated kind of decision or that interfered with it. Of course, this is not something... Oh, I can't go back. Okay, I'll just pretend that I remember what's on that slide. Systemically, I wouldn't think it would be a surprise to anybody that the stigma of long-term care is the beast that haunts many of us. And this was so prevalent, even the people who were dealing with self-initiated decisions had to deal with their own disappointment for having sort of failed to be good, healthy, successful, aging people. And this is really something we've got to figure out in long-term care, how to make it okay to be at different points in time and to still be successful. At the sort of interpersonal level, if you had a difference between what families thought was right and what residents thought was right around sort of where you should be. It was harder to get that self-initiated decision, which I think, again, wouldn't be a surprise. So, I'd have people in the study who talked about, well, I really wanted to be at my son's, but he didn't really believe in taking care of me, so I got put here. And, these things are complicated, but very little seemingly is being done to sort of help families and residents negotiate this a little bit more and flesh it out a little bit more in the community. So that was another piece. And at the individual level, I mean, you had to believe that that this was in some way okay. You had to reach sort of some level of acceptance. Some people, what they had done is, it was very helpful if they knew a friend in long-term care and it wasn't so bad. So the more we can sort of foster those connections for people. No one said, I'm doing this because I think this is going to improve my quality of life. Even though, and you will see this, and I'm sure you've seen this, it did for many people. But because of that stigma part, that was kind of never achieved at the decision-making level. Okay. So preparation for the move. I say or not because really there was more of the or not than the was. So what happened kind of from the time that you put the paperwork together and you sort of knew this was going to happen at some moment in time, and the time you got the phone call and the move itself? Again, there were systemic and organizational practices. We know this. The organizational pressure to move imminently is just devastating for people. It's as if we think that because you decided for these people, somewhat the abstract, that you're going to be placed, when you get the phone call, you're not making a decision. But in fact, you are. You're reaching that, okay, is this really it decision? And when there was a bit of empathy for that, that was very helpful. I mean, here's a quote. The girl called and said, you have 5 minutes to say yes or no. It's a semi. You have to share a room. You have 5 minutes. Let me know I'm going to a meeting. Okay, that was not any of us, right? I don't want to give the message that practitioners aren't good people. These are pressures we're getting, right? Fill the bed. And so we start talking like we're talking to someone who's a body in a bed. And just kind of even unpacking this a little bit, like where's the room, who you're sharing it with. I mean, if we're talking about sort of a place and a space and a home, we've got to get a little better at navigating these preemptive conversations. So that certainly felt really devastating to get that kind of a phone call and that kind of a message. At the interpersonal level, this I found really interesting. Both families really were trying to be helpful here. So they framed this, don't worry, Mom, I'm going to take care of it. You'd have your relative like, oh, all this. Don't worry, Mom, it's not your worry, it's our worry. So the issue here is that even if everyone thinks that's a good solution, at the back end, sorting through, participating in some way in the sort of decisions around your personal items helps with your creation of a more personalized space in long-term care. So probably another area where we could do something as practitioners around validating how really great families are being to make this offer, but possibly interfering a little bit with the process there. And of course, at the individual level, God, I'm never going to get this right. At the individual level, of course, none of these people could sort through items without the participation of their family. That's why they were going into long-term care themselves. So they needed help. And when they were told it's okay, don't worry about it, it kind of evaded that participation. The other piece, of course, people talked about the fact that it's way too painful for me to go through this stuff. So it's not just the families that are helping the evasion, it's the residents too. But how to kind of move that stage a bit more. Moving in, this is really where you're on. in long-term care. The systemic kind of issues make the biggest impact on that moving day experience. And, you know, the simple things that many of you probably do really do make a difference. The name tag on the door, someone actually expected you to be there, someone's ambassadoring you through for the day. As we know in long-term care, the admission day is a very long day. Not everybody expects it to be as long as it is. And we might do better to prepare people for what that day is going to look like. But when we really do welcome people and spend time with the residents, it's memorable to them. So you'll see sort of two opposite quotes here. This was the business as usual kind of, well, you know, you're basically, there's no sense of being welcomed. Everyone's just carrying on as if you're nobody special at all. I wasn't introduced for anything. And here's the important thing. You feel like a fish out of water. I mean, how discombobulating that would feel to be sort of embark on the hardest move in your life and kind of feel like it's no big deal to anybody else. So that's why I'm emphasizing how important that work is that you do on that day. This is the sort of more positive scenario, being welcomed. The morning I came in on my door, I think it's up there still, a big white welcome sheet. Everybody came in and welcomed me. I mean, people did talk about this being overwhelming, everyone from, the minister to the rec, but it felt welcoming. So even if they don't remember who you were, it seems to really matter. Okay? So at the adjustment stage, and remember, this is sort of the initial adjustment. Once again, the sort of three layers mattered. So we had the organizational level. Just your good practice right from the get-go makes a difference. Respecting people's private space, knocking on doors when you can, letting people bring in the personalized items that you can. This kind of stuff really helped people create a personalized space in their environment. And I know you know this grapple that you always have between risk and personal preference, right? It's like the bane of the long-term care sector's experience. Really questioning how risky is it really and to what benefit is really seemed to be important to people's sense of being able to make a personal space for themselves. And at, the interpersonal level, this is, again, remember I talked about the not being involved with sorting through your items at the beginning. This is another opportunity to encourage families to participate with the residents in the way they want to create their space for themselves. Some of the residents were taken home if they could still afford to hang on to their home for a little period of time to kind of sort through things. And it was really helpful in terms of the adjustment. So here's an example again. I've got all the negatives. I promise there are positives too. But this is a woman who sort of had someone just kind of come into her room. And it made me suspicious immediately. So, you're being, at the beginning, you're being tested here. How much is this place going to respect my space? And those things are hugely impactful on someone's adjustment because people are looking for their space not to be respected and for their personhood not to be expected, because that's what we're all told long-term care is about. So really at the front end, this is a critical time to think about how you create with them a sense of what their space is going to be like and what their experience is going to be like here. And here's another experience. And again, I do appreciate these are difficult decisions, but here's a woman, she couldn't get her dresser where she wanted it. No, she didn't want it in the closet. She wanted it where she wanted it because that's what helped her in terms of managing her personal space in her life. And at the end of the day, she didn't want the dresser at all. And she, this type of thing creates a conflict between whose space is this? And is this going to be my personal place to really live? Okay? So just to sort of give you the two scenarios, because I've taken two case examples here, and I'll close here. One that had generally positive conditions, and the other that had generally negative positions. And I want you to pay attention to this positive one because we don't hear these stories told to us very often. I think people should realize the fun you can have in these places if you want to have it. It's there for you. At least I'm finding it that way anyway. I'm enjoying every minute of it. So, we know this. We know that there can be a positive quality of life experience in long-term care. And the more we pay attention to fostering that as people are entering the process, the more likely we are to achieve that sort of kind of positive scenario. Okay? So I'm going to close there. There is sort of a chart that I have that I won't go through. I've kind of fed it to you just on how to address the different sort of levels. But I do have a handout for you. So if anyone's interested in thinking about how to change practice or thinking about adapting things, I should have quite a few copies of those for you. Okay? Thank you.